Wild dogs impact on all of the age groups of sheep. So unlike foxes or pigs, which might prey or kill lambs, wild dogs will actually kill all of the ages, so lambs, weaners, ewes, wethers and rams. So for a sheep producer suffering that level of attack across his whole flock, he soon finds out that his income stream is basically not making any dollars. He's stressed to the max because he physically can't protect his sheep. They will actually force sheep producers to move away from sheep altogether and move into either cattle or leave the district. So it becomes quite a stressful and an emotional decision to have to make for some of these people who have lived on the land and had sheep for 3 or 4 generations in their family.
Well, I think the cluster fencing at the present time is the only answer we've got to try and support and save our wool industry. Back in the 50s they built dog netting fences. They were built out of materials that didn't last that long. The kangaroos tore the bottoms off them and they weren't really an answer to the problem.
It's about 1.5 inch chicken wire at the bottom. It was buried in the ground. The soils here have rusted it off and the roos have punched holes underneath it. I don't know how it kept anything out. In the last probably 10 years, the wild dog population is growing on the back of the massive macropod population, and we're developing country. We're providing water, we're providing feed for our macropods as well as our dogs. Scalpings are now up around 3,000 dogs a year. It's almost uncontrollable.
We had massive losses of wethers on Knocknenny. We lost some 800 up there, and of course you immediately think they've been stolen or they're in next door neighbours, and you get ultralights in and you're looking for them and you start to think, well, how could they possibly have killed that many? I remember Joss and I talking about it here one night, and we said, look, ewes, especially young ewes, are $120 to $150 a head. We cannot let the dogs continue this carnage. And by 2011 we'd worked out that we'd lost 10,000 sheep. And this was an operation where we just bred our 4,000 odd lambs a year, and we had a pretty tight control on what our numbers were, and we were doing everything we could to control dogs. So we were baiting and trapping and shooting and giving people incentives to do their bit. A tough decision, but it was just one we had to make to sell all the sheep in 2011.
So in order to manage the impacts of wild dogs, through the National Wild Dog Action Plan, we've developed this approach called a nil tenure approach, which basically removes who owns the land and the boundaries. Dogs don't obey boundaries, pest animals don't obey boundaries, and got them to start looking at the landscape and where the dogs were moving, where they were causing impact and where they need to deliver their control. So what we've done is we've worked with those communities and communities and their local governments to form groups where everyone was delivering their control programs collectively.
Well, up until now, most dog control was at an individual level. Landholders themselves, we needed a more coordinated effort. Now the council has come on board and we have RLOs who distribute our baits, but the whole process now is coordinated, which it wasn't done probably 20 years ago. And that's been an exceptional advance as far as we're concerned.
Longreach formed a wild dog committee because there had been sporadic wild dog control, the odd committee here and there, but they're nothing really concrete like some of our neighbouring shires. So I just got together with a few concerned landholders and put a proposal to Longreach Regional Council, and they came back to us, and we eventually set up an advisory committee under the council, and we just took it from there.
We formed ourselves into a committee to try and control the dogs, but what happened was our lack of participation has forced us into cluster fencing because participation rates are down around that 30%, which just doesn't make it viable.
For a lot of these producers, fencing really is the last resort to remain in sheep and wool. The impacts of dogs are so debilitating both economically and emotionally that a lot of people have already left the industry, and as John Chandler describes, his family made that choice given that the impacts and the losses that it was no longer economically viable, and nor could he tolerate anymore the welfare implications of wild dog attacks on his livestock. We've got research that demonstrates that dogs can move up to 600 kilometres in 4 or 5 weeks. The only way these guys see to get the security to protect those livestock is to start putting up a physical barrier, and that's where the cluster fencing comes in. They can then manage their land and control wild dogs within that, and continue to support wild dog management through those wild dog committees to the rest of the people within the Shire that can't afford to go into those arrangements.
The fencing seems to now evolve us into the next stage of control, which is to eradicate the dogs out of an area and in small areas so that they can be controlled. Gives us a chance to manage our grazing pressures, gives us biosecurity controls. It gives us a lot of advantages that we never had before, lets us look after the land a lot better. The best way these fences work is to be as tight as you possibly can, which this one is, and we have to stop the animals from putting their heads through so they don't separate. Also at the bottom we have this footer that is pretty tight, that stops the animals from burrowing underneath, because as you dig out it keeps burying itself into the ground.
What we have seen is, as a consequence of this cooperative approach to the wild dog control programs, that people are more willing to work together. So by entering into a cluster fence means that each person only has to fence a certain proportion of their boundary, which then links to their neighbouring property, and so you end up with a number of properties, between 3 and 8 or 10 properties. What they end up with is an enclosed area where they can actually have proper control over what happens inside that fence. The funding program only provides for half of the material per kilometre for each of those fences, which works out to around $2,750. However, the cost to put up the fencing materials and maintenance and the preparation runs to around $7,000 a kilometre, and that additional cost has to be absorbed and paid for by the producers that are in that cluster. So that decision and going into that cluster agreement is quite a costly one.
With the rollout of dog fencing in the district, I think it's going to be really good not only for those people inside for wild dog control, they can have a better handle on the inside, but also on the outside. I think it provides an opportunity for people to bait up against those fences.
The cluster fencing will actually increase the sheep numbers in the area, which means the contractor will have a continuation of work. He will be able to employ more people. We like to keep people in our towns so that they can spend money in our towns and our towns evolve into a better community.
We've already seen shearers coming back to the district, and it really is an exciting time, and I certainly hope that it's going to result in more people coming to town, bringing kids to town, and then we've got more kids in schools, more money going to all sorts of business. So yeah, it's an exciting time, I think, that's for sure.
I'd go so far as to say this is one of the most exciting infrastructure bills since people started the GABSI scheme. And there's no doubt that people are extolling the virtues of their dog exclusion fencing.
I'm really looking forward to seeing these communities thriving again and seeing those producers rewarded for their effort and, you know, handing over their property to the next generation in a sound and sustainable manner so that they can maintain that thriving community approach to Western Queensland that we all know and love.